We're live.
Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. We're here. We've heard some information about our budget process, budget development process for this coming year, and we're here to continue that process. So we will continue, and this is for everyone's information, including the board. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Terranova first.
Thank you, Mr. DeLucia, and I'm actually going to quickly turn it over to Mr. Stutzman, who is our interim business official and has done an amazing job creating the structure for the 25-26 budget. As people know, Christine Griffin will be starting in about 2 weeks as our new assistant superintendent for business, and she will be taking over the process, but we thank Richard significantly for his work. And tonight I know we're going to talk about not only our building budgets, especially supplies and equipment, but we're going to talk just a bit about the governor's initial state aid projections that she put out on Tuesday. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Stutzman.
Thank you, Dr. Terranova. Sir, you two guys passed the buck and I'm the low man on the stick. Okay. Our agenda for tonight is, Dr. Terranova said, we're going to talk a little bit about the goals, what our building budgets look like as of today, the preliminary New York State aid, and I use that term preliminary because the numbers that the governor came out with are now in debate between the governor's office and the state legislature. At one time, you used to take, there was 3 different proposals, the regent's proposal, the governor's proposal, and then what the legislature ended up with. Well, the regents was asking for the moon. The governor gave us nothing, so what you used to do is you just took the 2 numbers divided by 2 and you're pretty close. But they don't do it that way anymore. And then review the budget calendar for the upcoming meetings moving forward. The goals of the budget, this is the same. Actually, we've had these for a few years to enhance the comprehensive education that this district expects, improve the alignment of resources towards our strategic plan, maintain the stabilization of reserves. In the last 4 years, this district has done an unbelievable job at putting together a capital reserve, which in large part is paying a good chunk of the capital project that was approved, the $99 million. It's going to pay $28 million of it. We try our best to maximize the use of every dollar spent, to maximize the ability to generate aid for future years. We did talk about it at the last meeting. We were moving money for the replacement of the card readers coming into the various doors, moving it from an expenditure that is somewhat aidable over 15 years to BOCES, where we can get 65 cents on the dollar back next year. And then the transparency is very important. So we're going to start with the little guys first, and we're going to talk a little bit about excuse me, the early childhood school. The one column in 24-25, we budgeted $25 million for equipment. We are reducing that to $7,500. That $12,500 will be on the next slide. It's not that we're reducing equipment, but we're reducing it in that building because in talking to Mr. DeRose, he got done what he needed to do in the 24-25 year. The contractual is up. You'll see where that is. It's up $4,000. Supplies, there's a couple factors into that. In library books, what we're trying to do is to try to equalize the amount of money spent in each building. So if you multiply 13.2 times 5, that's our library book aid. And we get that dollar for dollar. But there's another interesting fact with that. So the $12,500 has been reallocated to the general school equipment line item. The $4,000 has been added to the ESCS field trip line item to equalize the K-5 field trips at $7,000 per grade level. So because they have 2 kindergarten and first grade, they get $14,000. They only were allocated 10 in the current budget. $3,200 has been allocated to provide the billing administrator funds for their special ed teachers. 2,500 has been reallocated from health services to the nurses budget line item. So it's gonna, the principal now has control over those dollars spent in his building. The balance of the school supplies to cover the rising costs. Inflation is eating us up, and just like everywhere else, and we added where we thought we needed to. The 628 decrease, as I said, is to attribute equalizing the amount allocated to state library book funds. Library books, textbooks, software, and computer hardware, they're all interchangeable. So if you're not going to spend all of your library book money, we can transfer that over to textbooks and buy more textbooks. Or we could transfer the library book money into software. If we need if we need additional library money, then we can move money from software. And it's this allocation of funds, and if you don't spend it, you lose it. So we got to make sure we spend every dollar of it. So that's your early childhood budget. Primary school, somewhat very similar. Equipment remained the same. Contractual is down a little bit. Supplies is up. There's a reason for that. And library books is getting it down to the 13.2. The $1,000 in the primary school was subtracted from the VPS field trip because they had $15,000, but we brought them down to 14 again to keep with that $7,000 per grade level. 3,300 has been allocated for special ed teachers. What we did at the beginning of the year is we figured out how many special ed teachers we had in each building, figured out what the budget is, and then divided that by the total number of teachers, and then allocated it to the various buildings. So it's equitable. And then the supply line item to the rising costs of school supplies, and then again, the 1325 decrease in library books is attributable to equalizing the amount for state aided library.
Dick, quick question for you.
Sure.
You said if we don't use it, they lose it. Lose it to who?
It goes back to the state. We don't get it.
Okay, so these are all line
Okay.
items for state.
And every district is very good to make sure, but let's say we were gonna be $5,000 underspent in library books, we would then go out and buy computer software. Or we would go out and buy more textbooks. Or we may even go out and buy some more computer hardware. And you don't buy that you buy it through BOCES, but you don't get BOCES aid on it, because at BOCES, you only get 60-some cents on the dollar back. Here you get dollar for dollar. So it's just understanding the rules of the game and playing it to the advantage of Victor.
Dick, just to follow up on that too, the way I'm understanding it is some of these funds, like for example, third bullet, 2,500 health services, you're stating that's discretionary spending with the principal without oversight?
No.
Okay.
He works with a nurse,
Got it.
okay?
Would that be the same for what you just described for library books and the other
Yes,
equipment?
yes. The library group works with Angela.
Okay.
Alfronte,
right.
okay? And they work hand in hand.
Yep, thanks.
They talk it through. And I'll be honest with you, back, I won't say how many years ago, but it was a ways back. You didn't have this discretion. Library books were library books, and software is software, and textbooks were textbooks. But, software is a big part, and districts felt they had their hands tied because they didn't have any flexibility with it. So the state, a while back, decided that, yes, we will allocate, because there's a certain allocation per student for each category, but they lump it all in one.
So
and then
all
you break it
schools
up.
have these same line items essentially?
Yes.
And then why does it get grouped into here versus what the taxpayer monies? How does that get?
Well, what ends up happening is you have your total budget, and then you have your revenues. That's part of state aid. State aid reduces the amount of taxes people pay, just like, interest earnings. Right. And when you guys get to the revenue side of the budget, you'll see those things. Yes, that's how that, it reduces the local share. And that's how we use it.
Thank you.
No problem, good question. Intermediate school, equipment stayed the same, contractual's down a little bit. Again, supplies is up. Library books lost a little bit, but you will see where the junior high and the high school pick up a little bit, because they were sort of down below. Okay, so we're up about 8.56%, and they had $22,000 at the intermediate school for field trips, but again, $7,000. The $7,000 is for the 3 elementary buildings. Junior high and high school is a little bit different. Again, the $2,500, we took it from the health services total and moved it to the nurse's budget line item in the building. And then the $2,500 is to cover the inflationary costs, and again, the library books is the same explanation. Okay? Junior high equipment remained the same, contractual's up $500. Supplies are up, library books is up $792, and this budget's up about 13%, but the majority of it is in supplies. And actually, if you take $500, that's an 8% increase. But it's over $6,000. Okay, we had the $2,500 was reallocated like we have done in the other buildings. $3,600 to rising costs of school supplies, and the $3,400 to provide the building administrator for the special ed teachers, and then the $792. In every building, the explanations are very, very similar on what we're trying to do. I have met with all 5 principals. They're pleased with what we've been able to do, and they really appreciate the fact that they now know, and it's just not buried somewhere. They know how much money they have. Senior high, contractual's up. Again, supplies are up. The supply line is interesting, and we'll get that one to the explanation. And then they're bringing their library books up to $13,200. Okay, $4,200 has been allocated for the special ed teachers. $5,200. This was interesting. Somehow, and I can't answer this, but the supply line items, the amount of monies in English and somehow get inadvertently left out of the budget. So we went back to figure out what it was the year before, and we've reallocated that back because all the other departments have that money, and where do the English and Low get their funds? So we found that. Again, the $2,500 is the exact same explanation. It's a $1,462 increase for inflation, library books, and then they never had money in their budget for field trips. But again, I think that was in something else that was inadvertently, because we went back in a year or two before, they had $3,200. They go on field trips. So we've allocated funds for that. And it's not as much, but their clubs, they have clubs and stuff where the elementary school doesn't have it. So that's your senior high school budget.
Nick, really quick, just to ask a question about contractual junior high. We went through that quick, so I want to.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I just want to compare. Can you just give a breakdown of what is included in contractual? Only because by comparison, you see 91,000 at the senior high, and then you see 6,000 at the junior. I think it's just worth an explanation as to why those are so different.
The junior high budget is less. Contractual is like conferences. Okay, that's basically the majority of it. In 91,000, you have contracts with vendors for some of the departments, like in the science department. Okay, for the science equipment. Same with technology. Okay, that's where that money comes about. And I could get that to you, what it makes up, if that's what you want.
Thanks,
We could do that.
appreciate it.
Just a quick question on field trips. I know at one point they weren't in the budget and the foundation, the Education with Foundation was covering them. And like there was a choice within buildings to not,
But a year ago,
Okay.
maybe it was 2 years ago, the decision was made that we would start funding those. Now, the PTSA or the foundation does do that, but we've taken on a little bit more responsibility.
Okay.
Because it's getting difficult for them too.
Yeah, because it's the per head,
Yes.
shoots your whole budget. when
Right.
You're talking 300 kids. So, so it's in like their general budget, each grade's getting
Yes.
7,000
But we're also
with the plan.
We're also utilizing the, right now, the foundation, the Victor Education Foundation is paying for I think it's the fourth grade Sam Patch trip, which is new. I think it's relatively new. So they've been funding that this year, and we're hoping next year, we're talking to them about that. But the majority of field trips are now funded by us. But they're still helping, and I don't know if the PTSA is helping with any field trips at this point for next year.
They did help minimal,
All right.
okay? Very minimal.
I just wanted to make sure the foundation got a little
Yeah,
credit there too,
yeah.
because they've been helping out as well.
No, they've done a great job.
So that's what I was wondering, it's like where
Yes.
because one of their hesitations of doing it was they weren't sure if they could do it long-term. So I didn't know if
Right.
something changed.
So we
but
moved
they
towards
are
it.
still.
You know, we may not be able to go as much, but the fact is there are funds there,
Yeah, that's great.
okay?
Dick, quick question.
Sure.
These numbers are all based off of specific population in each school. They fluctuate, so 15 kids show up in August that are attending Victor. Would these numbers fluctuate?
No. The only place where it would fluctuate is if they are an outside placement, let's say going to BOCES, okay, or going to some kind of a private school that we have to fund. But no, these allocations are not based upon population, okay? It's more historical than anything else. And what we've tried to do is to try to maintain as best we can the same amount year in and year out. But what we found this year is that, at least in the supply line items, okay, the costs are starting to erode, and then we have to go somewhere, we have to move money, or, we also have this plan to, try not to spend the whole budget, because you just never know when something would come up where you may get $100,000 shot that you're gonna have to pay for, and you have no choice. But the majority of that contractual is in the various departments, okay? You don't have those types in the junior high school. And this is the overall effect. Your non-personnel for your 5 buildings is going up about 5%, a little over 5%, $35,000. Before we move on to state aid, is there any other questions on this?
Well, again, this is pretty much all funded through state aid, right? That's what I was hearing you say.
No, state aid funds the library books. But state aid funds a portion of the entire budget.
Okay.
Okay? Now, for instance, your total state aid this year is roughly $39 million, but your budget is $103 million. So maybe it funds 37% of the budget without doing quick arithmetic. I tried to do that in my head.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay?
I'm sure we can get a book from the library to help figure it out. The reason why I asked that question is when you look at the non-personnel changes, clearly there's a 5% increase, which keeps going in line. I'm not sure have currently landed with inflation percentage. But this, 3.5%, I mean, this, I still think this helps tell that story of where, you know, as these expenditures continue to climb and we need to budget for it.
Right.
There's a shortfall still with what we
And-
think is the aid. And I know you're gonna get there. I'm stating the fact that these numbers really help tell that story.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Last year, there was no increase in the lines. Okay, now, and this is always a great discussion when we start having it, is, you know, you're gonna start reducing the budget. We can cut materials and supplies. Well, that's $345,000 next year out of over $100 million budget in schools. You know, I mean, you could take that $11,000 away. And it's a reduction. I'm not gonna deny that. But that's always part of where we go. Plus the fact, remember, this is a snapshot of one portion of the budget. Now, when we get to a different presentation, you're gonna see where the health services supply line item is reduced by $12,500. So what we did is we reallocated. And you're gonna see where we reduced in equipment, but it went to the general equipment line item for schools. All right, it's not going to Chris Marshall, and it's not going to it's going back, but it's an overall number that we can, you know, use if we run into a situation where we have to buy more equipment for the buildings. So the governor came out with her proposal on Tuesday, and 24-25, that's our actual aid for this year. 39,179,096. Your foundation aid, your building aid, your BOCES aid, your transportation aid, and other state aid, which includes the library books and those types of things, okay? Your governor's numbers, she's proposing that we would receive $40,128,982, which is roughly a $950,000 increase or 2.42%. Your foundation aid is up 4.3%, which is a good number. Your building aid, because you're going to pay a tad bit less in debt next year, okay, is down less than 1%. Your BOCES aid is down almost 12%. There's an explanation for that. Transportation aid is up 3.86, which is a decent increase. Then your other state aid is 2.5%. But here are some explanations. When you compare the estimated 24-25 state aid budget amount to the actual state aid for 24-25, the good news, and I repeat that, the good news is we're ahead $37,000. So we're going to at least break even. We're not going to get a ton more, but we're not going to get less. So that's good. The building aid in 25-20 reflected in the proposal does not include any payments we may make on the newly approved capital project prior to the conclusion of the 24-25 school year. I've talked to Ben from Fiscal Advisors. We've toyed with that. Right now, I don't think we're going to do that. Okay, we're going to leave it as is, and the first payment probably would be in the 26-27 school year. But when you see what our debt does, but then you have to add $5 million to the revenue. So that takes care of the conversation we had today. So it helps us a lot, okay? And then the governor's proposal for BOCES and transportation aid reflects a moment in time. It's a specific date. But we're going to do things with BOCES. And transportation, they don't have our new contracts in there that we just approved. And So those numbers are not quite right. We should receive more than what's reflected in the 25-26 governor's numbers. I can't tell you the number, but it should be more. It'll be probably closer to 3.2 for BOCES, and transportation probably could be closer to 4. So that should help us. But remember, you may or may not know that in April. So then it becomes a guesstimate. Do we or do we not say we're going to get that, which is great if we do, but then the question becomes, what if you don't? And now you're behind the 8 ball. And the last thing you want to do is overstate your revenues. Okay? You may understate an expenditure here and there, but the last thing you want to do is to overestimate your revenues.
So here's our current situation right now. It's January, that's the good news. There's good news and challenging news. Good news, can you go back to the other slide? Thanks.
Sure.
The good news is it's January, not April.
Yeah.
The good news is the foundation aid initial governor's proposal of 4.3% is not terrible. It's not great, but it's not terrible. The challenging news is the other aid amounts, which are very conservative right now, as Richard just said, are smaller than 4.3%, so you end up with 2.42%. The challenge is this type of revenue for state aid, if it came out to be around 40 million, isn't enough really to meet the needs of our district with the staffing that we have and the expenses that we need to support that staff, especially with increases in health benefits and pension. So the process we're using right now is we need to continue to advocate the state, because again, this is just the governor's number. The legislators, as Richard said, have to debate and work with their constituents, which is us, and ultimately come up with a final budget, theoretically by April 1st, but it might be later. And then we're also at this point really starting to take a deep look at our expenses, our actual expenses, and what we need to ultimately be successful as a district to get that number to a place that is as accurate as possible. And so the combination of advocacy and whittling down our expenses between now and early March is critical, that we need to keep you updated on. And then March, when we really get into the personnel, that's where we'll have more specifics and where the areas are that we need to focus on to make sure we have a balanced budget and to make sure that we can keep our staff the way it is right now. The other thing we're doing, which I found to be very helpful, is, and thanks to Richard's leadership, is we're creating basically an Excel chart for the next 3 to 5 years. We've always done this chart where we try to project out a very short amount of time, because it gets pretty, it's tough to project out after 3 or 4 years. But we're projecting out. We're good. It's great that we're going to be. I believe we're going to be okay for next year. Where the worry comes in is what happens a year from now, and 2 years, and 3 years from now. So we're also projecting out expenses that are as accurate as possible and potential revenues, so that we can forecast out, hey, what does this look like in the next 2 to 3 years if our state aid doesn't improve? And so all of that information will also be shared with you over the next 2 months, so that ultimately at the end of the day, which would be as we move into the beginning of April, the board can make a educated decision on the exact budget that is best for the community. So I want to be clear, I'm not saying we're cutting staff, we're not doing that. I'm not saying we have wonderful aid news either. This is a beginning, and there's good news and challenging news, and we just need to work through the process to get to where we need to be.
So for those 3-year projections too, I mean, obviously we've got a capital project in there. Do we have a ballpark anticipated completion that would be an impact factor? For example, you've got more rooms, you've got more eating expenditures,
right,
et cetera, et cetera. So is that part of that analysis?
It's not as much, that's not as much right now, because that could be 4 to 5 years out.
Right.
But what is in our calculations is the combination of debt versus aid on the building. So that is definite, and that's worked out over the next several years. And that plays a huge role in our budgetary strategy, because when debt falls off, aid falls off. But if you can keep it as equal as possible, you get steady amounts. That's what we're really looking at.
The other factor here is too, and it's a little bit too early because we don't know all the numbers, but you got the tax cap calculation too. But one of the things is that all these presentations have been budget to budget. Not so much with the contractual, the supplies and equipment, but when you look at personnel, do you budget your negotiated contracts, those percents of increases, on the budget number or on the estimated actual number? Because the estimated actual number should be less than what was budgeted. So for discussion only, if you take 4% of $10 million, which is your budget, okay, that's a $400,000 increase. If you take 4% on $9 million, that's a $360,000 increase. So rather than adding $400,000, you add $360,000. And when you reduce those budget numbers, okay, then the next thing to look at is like with health insurance. What are we actually paying for health insurance? So do you budget 15%, which is the going rate, of the budget number, or on the estimated actual number? Because that would be, I mean, you're still increasing, but the increase isn't as great. So that could help a little bit. Because remember, when we presented that personnel budget, the first draft back in December, we were over $5 million. We're not even getting $1 million in state aid. So we're still $4.5 million short.
Yeah, but it's clear to say that 4.5 million isn't the actual expense.
No.
So I don't want people to think that we have a 4.5 million gap.
No,
right
we're
now.
talking
Which
where
is
we
why
are.
it's really important to continue to whittle down the actual expenses of our personnel especially, so that we can have better predictability around what we can afford, which we believe, certainly for the next year, is with the staff we currently have. But ultimately, really, because we don't want to make we don't want to make mistakes and look at reductions of things when we don't actually need to reduce them. So that's why it's going to be really important to have those actual personnel numbers and the financing around it to make the appropriate budget.
And you'll see here, the personnel review is on Wednesday, March 12th. The 27th, we'll go through those, you guys will go through the revenues and the tax cap calculation, because the 28th is when you have to submit the tax cap. And then on February 13th, we'll go through the Office of Instruction and Pupil Services. And by the way, the budget, as you've seen so far, has not included a wish list. Just trust me, there is a wish list. It's not long, but it's costly.
Okay, any questions from the board? Excuse me? No, it's specific to it's specific to each district. So there's a general number of increasing of the governor's proposal for the total amount of foundation aid that she's proposing for the state. And then through this formula that they are revising, they determine each district's aid. So some districts will have bigger increases in foundation aid than others. Some districts will remain flat. Some have, like I said, so it fluctuates depending on the district, the enrollment, the needs of the students, and so on and so forth.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. Your microphone is not on.
The question was the 4.3% foundation aid, is that based specific to Victor? And the answer was yes.
Yes, definitely. And if you look at the 25, 26 governor's numbers, there's 700 and some school districts. Every district is different, okay?
Do you have any idea how we felt? Because
No,
we
I
have
do
any
not.
impact on?
I know that the district to the left of us on the chart got 2% foundation aid.
We have all the districts and what their aid, again, this is not their actual aid, this is the governor's proposal. But yes, we are aware of what other districts, we have the list of this, of the formulas for every district, or at least the preliminary numbers. And some did better than us, and some are even worse.
Is there any negotiation in that yet, or no?
That's between the legislature and the
Well,
governor.
yeah, that's why the advocacy right now has to occur from districts such as ourselves with both the governor's office and the legislators. Because the legislators are the ones who are going to then put out their own version of the budget. And then ultimately, as Richard talked about earlier, then the governor and the legislators negotiate to come up with a final budget, which could be significantly different than that one, or could be similar.
Just a quick question, because I'm kind of new to all this. All of these and this are just the budgeted, they're not actuals.
No, it is, at this point in time, it's very hard to predict what the actual will be for the 24, 25 year,
If you're halfway in it, yeah.
okay? There's a number that, there's a total number that we probably would end up with, and maybe a little bit more, okay? But when you start doing comparisons, it's budget to budget.
Okay, that's it. So
But we could base the increases on what we think would be the estimated actual.
okay.
It's easier to do that with personnel and fringe benefits than it is any other part of the budget. The other thing that we haven't gotten yet, and I got the edutech, or the technology BOCE services today. We haven't heard from BOCES yet on what their increases are.
True.
Which doesn't help. I'm assuming 5%, but I don't think it'll be 5. It'll be a little bit more, a little bit less than that. At least we tried when I was working at BOCES. A couple times, we always tried to stay within the 3% range. But I don't know how they do it here.
Any other comments or questions?
Board members?
No, Dick, I like the way it was presented.
Thank you.
Straightforward, the format was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, very helpful, appreciate it. If there's nothing else,
Get your budget books too. There's two more sections coming.
okay.
And these are just the budgeted, they're not the actuals.
That's where, those numbers there is how you got the PowerPoint.
Yeah, so this is just like budget year to budget year.
Yes.
So like what was budgeted in, so from like 23 to 24.
24, 25.
Well, that's this
25,
year.
26.
But like to see like what, I'm just thinking like comparing the budget to the actual of like a complete year to see where we ended up with reserves. You know, it's like where did we over budget and stuff. But is that accessible somewhere, or is that just kind of a you thing?
That's a different way of doing this.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Could it be done? Yes.
Yeah, and it's not like to look at the budgeting it's more like just a kind of to get an overall picture of where money's going and where we think it's going. And then where we ended up
What you
spending.
guys could do down the road is to have a printout of the 23, 24 budget.
Mm-hmm.
Detail of the expenses, And what you could see is you could see where the surpluses are.
Yeah,
It's like a
that's
13
exactly.
or 14-page report.
Yeah.
But you're correct, Carol, or if you look through this budget, if you go to any page around, for example, staff or teachers, you'll see some teachers, it's the budgeted amount we had.
Right.
For 24, 25. So there'll be, example, a teacher on there that we know is retiring. So we're probably not gonna pay that next person $98,000, because that person, we're hopefully gonna hire at a significantly less rate. But those are the things that, as a personnel office and business office, where we're looking at to whittle down to the actual cost, and that, so that we can have a better idea of, which was what we have to be obviously transparent with the board about, so that we can really zone in on what is our costs, what are our costs, so that we know what money we need, you see. But yeah, these books are based on people who were budgeted back in the spring.
Yeah.
But we are doing that work, and we'll make sure we're communicating that with the board.
Okay.
We have to. Knowing that we've, not to go on a long rant here, but knowing that we built in approximately a 3.5% to 4% contingency in this 24-25 budget. We didn't budget 100% towards our expenses. We budgeted roughly 96%, because we want that 3.5% to 4.5% in case there's emergencies, and if there's not emergencies, to save in our reserves. So that's our goal for next year, to keep at least a 3.5% contingency of budgeted money, so that we're not in a crisis where we have to budget 100% towards everything.
Your budget is $100 million.
Yeah.
I thought I turned it off.
I think that's the state calling, huh?
Yeah.
I think we got it.
Your budget's $100 million. The goal is to spend $97 million. Okay? And then that gives you some surplus. Plus the fact on the revenue side, you know, your interest earnings are probably gonna be more, okay, than what we had budgeted. But the fact is that do you budget $50,000 more when your interest rates may go down? What if you don't get there? And that makes it difficult too.
We gonna have like usually you try to do the capital projects, so like when one goes off, another one's on.
Yes.
Are we gonna have a gap because of like the
No.
delays in state aid or state, the, approvals and stuff?
No.
But we're not?
No,
Okay.
no. Matter of fact, I'm meeting with Ben and Christine on the 11th of February, but he's got it all planned out. Okay? Our first payment will start in 26, 27 for the $99 million project. But you'll see a tremendous increase in debt, the debt service. But again, you'll see a tremendous increase on the building aid side of that same equation.
But it'll like kind of like one debt will fall off and the other will start.
Yes.
Our timing wasn't messed up by the.
No.
delay.
And when they did this, they knew it was gonna take, that we weren't gonna start till 26, 27.
That's why we needed to do the vote in October, because if we waited much longer, that's what would have happened.
Matter of fact, they're gonna be submitting the schematic drawings probably early spring for the Learning Center, some of the other Phase 1 projects, and the redo of the old transportation building.
Okay, for the record, I just wanted to raise one of the question that Dr. Parks sent in an email. Have we ever attempted to gather data to estimate the amount of how much our teachers spend out of pocket for classroom supplies? And we saw your answer, Dick, that the out-of-pocket that teachers spend is at least $300
If they're taking advantage of the $300 tax adjustment,
from their income, yeah.
their income tax.
So for the record, I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure people heard that.
They can only write off $300 worth of supplies. That's it.
It's an adjustment, it's not an itemized deduction, because most people can't itemize anymore.
That should be an above the line item.
It is. It's an it's
Only the 300 though.
only 300, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm saying it should be, whatever you spend, you should be able to write off.
They limit it to 300, but you get the same break on the state.
And I guess Christopher also had another question that, about that you had answered on, in our emails, that I think people might like to know too, is that, that library aid, when we put it per building, it's really like if one, if senior high doesn't need to use it all, but
Yeah, but you can move it around.
it's all.
It's very flexible.
Yeah, flexible, and
It's
that's
very
great.
flexible.
That's a great thing.
Matter of fact,
And there's no reason that it doesn't get used, because there's always a need somewhere.
no, I mean, and
It's
if you
just
don't
a
use the library, go
communication.
use it for computer software.
Yeah, there's always gonna be a need.
Matter of fact, by parlaying the library money, the software money, and the textbook money, we're gonna be able to jumpstart, okay, something we're trying to do with ELA for next year. We'll buy it this year.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, definitely use it all each year. There's always a need.
Okay, anything else? I guess we've had a workshop. Thank you, folks. And thanks for tuning in, whoever is out there.
Thank you, everybody.